Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we're going to be looking at the Offline Interviewer app. For those of you who are completely new to it, the Snap XMP Offline Interviewer app allows you to run face-to-face interviews in locations where a data connection is patchy or non-existent. The general plan for this session will be to have an overview of what the app does, along with looking at some of the different settings which might be used in different scenarios. I'll show you how to set up your surveys for use with the app, and then how to share that survey with your interviewers. This includes the ability to provide independent participant lists to different interviewers, essentially providing a to-do list for each member of the interviewing team. There are lots of benefits associated with using the app. Some are fairly obvious, including the fact that you don't have to contend with bits of paper when out and about. This ties in with the fact that your data is entered as the interview takes place, rather than having to key it back in when you're back in the office. The data itself is sent back securely to the server if there's a signal, or kept encrypted on the device if you are offline, and then sent off as and when a connection is restored. So as long as you have a signal at some point to get the survey on the device, when you're actually interviewing, it really doesn't matter if you're on or offline. The form itself can be as feature-packed as you like, containing the full functionality of a Snap XMP online survey, which includes the options of quotas and screenouts to make sure that you're only collecting the data that you need. A few of the lesser known benefits: the app allows for audio recording. This could be a recording of a response to an open-ended question. This means that you're not faced with attempting to speedily input the ramblings of a participant, whilst also trying to take in what they're saying, at the same time as pretending to look interested. It also means that you get a better idea of the intent or meaning behind the answer, so how happy or angry are they? Sometimes you just need to hear the tone. Another option is to record the audio of the entire interview, so whilst inputting the answers, the whole conversation is going to be captured. This means you can then listen back when back in the office and capture the off-the-cuff remarks that only a conversation can open up. This can be really useful when you know that you're going into a situation when the conversation will be jumping all over the place, with the participant steering the interview rather than following the flow of the planned questions. Keeping on the idea of conversations, there will always be times when a participant needs to stop the interview. It could be that their phone's just gone off, maybe the food shop's just turned up, or perhaps they've just had enough. Interviews can be saved partway through and then resumed at a later time and date, with the option also to submit any partially completed surveys if you don't end up returning to that particular interview. There's also an option to set up the app in kiosk mode, the idea being that the device is then accessed by passers-by and locked down to stay within a particular form. If they walk away partway through, it will reset itself back to the beginning of the interview, with the option for any partially completed data to be submitted or deleted. So a whole host of features and functionality which is aimed at making the life of the interviewer, who is out on the coalface collecting the data, as easy as possible. Before we go any further, there are a couple of things you'll need to run a survey using the Offline Interviewer. You'll need access to either Snap XMP Desktop or Snap XMP Online in order to build the survey or form. You'll need a device to run the interviews on. This could be a laptop or PC, but typically it would be a tablet or mobile phone. On that device, you'll need to download the Offline Interviewer app. That's completely free of charge. It could be found on the various app stores. The person doing the interview will need to create themselves a free interview account. This is really just a permission, and if you've already got a researcher account, then actually that permission's already assigned to you anyway. But typically it's not going to be you that's going out and about to conduct the interviews. It may be a colleague or perhaps a team of colleagues, so they would each need to create themselves a free interview account and then log into the app. That will then give them access to any questionnaires that you've shared with them. So a few things to get set up, but ultimately you need a device, the app, and an account to log into. Okay, let's take a look at the setup in terms of the build process and also the app itself. Today I've got a couple of surveys that I'm going to be using to demonstrate. One of these was created in the desktop software and one was created in the online software. But remember, it really doesn't matter where you create a survey because everything's synchronized between the two. Today I'm going to be using the Windows app on my laptop rather than trying to share the screen of a mobile phone or tablet. Functionally, it's pretty much identical, although you can also use biometrics to log in on an Android or Apple device, which can be quite handy if you're logging in quite a bit. And it does look a little bit more app-like on those devices as well. Before we go any further with the app, I'll begin by opening up a very simple survey called Shopping Centre Interviews. If I head into the Build tab, as you can see, there isn't a great deal to this particular survey, just a couple of questions with some page breaks. This example is taking the role of an interviewer-led survey where a member of your team is out and about running some sort of face-to-face interviews with people at a shopping centre. Because of this, I've added some notes for the interviewer, which I've made stand out using a different colour and also smaller font. In your setup, it may well be that you're passing the device to the participant for them to complete themselves for certain sections or perhaps even the entire interview. Apart from that, there's not a lot more to say about the setup. My one bit of advice though is to consider the interviewer. If they're going to be using this form 50 or 60 times a day, they want simplicity. They will very quickly get bored of seeing lots of image-led questions and having lots and lots of page breaks. So consider the speed and ease of working through the form if it's going to be repeatedly used by the same person. As mentioned, if you are handing the device over, that's going to be a completely different scenario where you're going to want to make it as fun and engaging as possible, whilst of course also making sure it's still user-friendly and not all style over matter. So the questionnaire has been fully designed. I'll head to the Collect tab. And the first thing I'm going to do before I forget is go into Change Options. And this is where we can mark this to be used with the Snap Offline Interviewer app, or SOI for short. There's also the option in there for syncing participants, so we're going to look at that one a little bit later. So for the time being, I'll just click Save. The survey is ready to start, so I'll press Start Interviewing. But of course, rather than running this project as a normal online survey, we're going to be sharing with our team of interviewers. And sharing is set up within the Summary tab. If I go to Shares, I've already got one person in here already, which is a training account, which we're going to be using a little bit later. But initially, I'm going to add a new user. And I've got my colleague called Bob at Snap. And Bob is going to be an interviewer. So we have some other permissions in there, so we could share them as a full user of this survey, so they have access to sort of edit the survey, publish the survey, etc. But Bob is just going to be doing some interviewing for me, and likewise, I don't want Bob to be sharing this with anyone else, so we'll just save. Bob's now got instant access to that survey via the app, and that's because the survey is already live. If I was to pause or stop the live survey, his access would be removed. As I said, I have already got another person in there, NP Training 1 at snapsurveys.com, so they've also got access to the survey with exactly the same settings, and it's that account which I'm now going to log into the app with. So if I open up the app, now when you open up the app for the very first time, you'll be prompted to go to Settings, and this is where you can confirm which server you're going to be using. So it's likely you're going to be using either the UK server or the US server. You can see you have the option to change. It may well be that you have Snap Online installed though on your own servers. If that was the case, you would need to click this button and identify where your server is located. But today we're going to be making use of the UK server. And I'm going to log in as my NP Training 1 at snapsurveys.com. And I'm going to keep myself logged in just to save myself having to log in and out. You can see there's a survey sat there waiting for me already called Company Site Visits, which we're going to be using a little bit later, but I'm going to synchronize. And now we've got options to choose different surveys. As mentioned, if I was to pause or stop either of those surveys, that would then be removed from this list. Now, I've been talking about the app and how it works offline, but I've also just been synchronizing with the server To confirm, you do need to be online at some point in order to get that survey onto the device, but after that I could fully disconnect or dig a big hole and encase myself in lead. The surveys will remain fully functional. It just means that the data is going to sit on the device until such times that I re-establish a connection, and I also won't have any updates or any access to any updates that might have been made back in the office. On that note, if 2 hours into a day of interviewing you realise that you've forgotten to add a question or you've sort of needed to add some additional routing, you can make the change back in the office and republish. If your interviewers are online, then the survey will update on their device. If they're not online and it's an important change, then you might want to get a message to them via sort of phoning them or texting them, etc., and asking them to reconnect for a moment in order to pick up those latest changes. I'll open up my shopping centre interviews. And then let's complete a couple of interviews. So there's some text substitution happening in this particular survey. So if I type in city market, and I've selected Asda and Costco, my next question has different supermarkets with Asda and Costco disappeared. If I now click Aldi, we can see we've now got the options that I've been selecting as well as that city market which I typed in a moment ago. There's also some static masking, so removing options which aren't available. If I click submit, now when I click submit it basically works itself in a bit of a loop, so we're now back to the start of the next interview. I'll just complete a couple more. If I was to complete 10 interviews or sit and wait for 10 minutes, then the app's going to automatically synchronize. That is a setting that you can change, and that's something you might want to consider if battery life on your device isn't so good, and we'll be looking at those settings in just a moment. But rather than waiting it for auto sync, I'm going to manually synchronize today. So I'll just come out of the survey and press the sync button. That will send any data back to the server ready to be analysed, and at the same time we'll check to see if there's any updates to this particular survey, as well as checking my share access to any additional surveys. So pretty straightforward, but a 30-second recap. We create the survey in desktop or Snap Online, activate it for offline interviewing within Snap Online, and then share it with your interviewers. They log in and do their bit, and you automatically get the data. The bit which might catch you out, remember you do need to make the survey live in order to see it on the app. Okay, let's have a look at a survey that's a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to open up a survey within Snap Desktop, and this time it's called Company Site Visits. This survey is again taking the line of an interviewer-led questionnaire, but this time I've got a group of interviewers who will be doing some door-to-door interviewing of various businesses. In my scenario, I've got 2 interviewers, and each of these interviewers will be given a set of people or set of companies to visit and interview. So effectively I have a participants list that is going to be split up between my different interviewers to ensure there's no crossover. If we take a look at the questionnaire, it again has a few notes and instructions for the interviewer, and this time the general comment question has been set up to record the verbatim answer, which uses the device microphone. And towards the end, the survey is looking at the answers given throughout the questionnaire and then pre-answering a final question which is based around a follow-up visit. A similar example could be used to offer advice and guidance based on the answers given. This means the person running the interview and asking the questions doesn't need to have their own background knowledge of whatever subject it is that's being discussed, as the form itself will be providing the knowledge base. In the background I have a spreadsheet attached, so I'll just open that one up. And this details the list of different interviewers and also the companies that they're going to be using, and I've got some data which is going to be seeded into the questionnaire as well. So my two interviewers today, I've got training@snapsurveys.com and mptraining1@snapsurveys.com. So I'll log into the app and look at this survey. So this time it's the company site visits. I'm due to visit a business, and the client ID, which will pull in all the relevant details about that client, is just the first line of their address. So today I'm going to make use of 17 East Street, which if you look at my spreadsheet, you can see that's the ID, and that should be pulling in the details for all good records. I'll click next, and you can see it's pulling in the details as we were hoping for. So I'll click yes to confirm that that is okay. And there's a number of questions, including pulling in the information from my spreadsheet. So these are all the issues that were raised on my last visit. And then we've got some options to see if any of these changes have been implemented. As we saw earlier, there's the option to record some audio for the open-ended comment questions. And in this particular example, I'm going to answer some questions here. And if I click next, you can see it's automatically suggesting that we do not require a follow-up visit. Whilst if I go back and trigger one of these trigger questions, you can see it's now suggesting that we do need a follow-up visit. Now, in this particular example, I've set it up so the interviewer can actually override that, because it may well be that actually they think that that's not correct, and based on what they've seen, they 100% believe they do not require a visit. But that's a setting so we can decide whether this can be overwritten or not. I'll start another one, and this time I'm going to go with 19 East Street. Again, got a different company this time. And this time I'm going to get halfway through, and then for whatever reason we're going to decide actually we need to stop this interview. So I'm going to save the response. It will default to the time and date of where we are at the moment, but I'm actually going to save this as 19 East Street. And if I click save, when we come back to the interviewer, we've got the option to continue where we left off. We can submit the partial data or delete the partial data or start a brand new interview. I'm going to log out now of this particular interviewer, and this time I'm going to log in as the other interviewer. Again, I'll keep myself logged in. This time we've just got access to the one survey, the company sites visit. So again, I'll open that one up. And if I log in as someone who isn't on my list, so again, I'll try and log in as 17 East Street. You can see the record isn't recognized. If I go and log in as maybe 18 West Street, which is someone on my list, it is recognized. So again, if I trigger one of the answers, this time you can see we do need a follow-up visit. If I go back to my spreadsheet, you can see that there was one particular ID, so 19 North Street, which didn't actually have an interviewer assigned to them. Now that actually means that that person is actually assigned to everyone on this list. So whether I sign in as NP Training 1 or training@snapsurveys.com, they will both have access to this person. So just to confirm, if we go in and do 19 North Street, you can see even though I wasn't really assigned to this person, I do have access to that person. I'm not going to go into too much more detail about the setup of participants that are going to be used with the offline interviewer app, as there's a more detailed video which I'll be pointing you to at the end. But I will quickly pop back into Snap Online a second. I'm just going to take you into the participants of that survey. So if I go into collect and participants and participant list, There's a couple of options in here which are just quite useful. So if I click on one of these participants, so 19 East Street, we've got some information here about what's going to be seeded in. If I click on edit, we've got the option to edit any of these details. And we spoke about 19 North Street. If I go into the Interviewers tab, we can see here that 19 North Street doesn't have an interviewer assigned to them, so I have got the option to go in there and manually assign it to one of my interviewers. Now, obviously that's about making individual changes. Realistically, if you wanted to edit lots and lots of information, maybe add some new participants, change some of the seeded data, you'd realistically probably want to upload a new spreadsheet or an edited spreadsheet instead, rather than making those changes manually. Just to finish off, I wanted to show you a couple of things which will make your life easier, especially for those of you that are running lots of surveys using the offline interviewer, and with that it's quite likely you're going to have a larger bank of colleagues and interviewers who are out on the street running those actual interviews. We've spoken about sharing individual surveys. If you've got quite a few different surveys and similarly quite a few interviewers, sharing each survey with each interviewer is going to be quite time consuming and also quite cumbersome in terms of the management of this. Instead, you might consider having a few different folders which are shared with different teams of interviewers. Today I've got a folder or main folder called Field Research Team, and that folder is shared with a couple of my colleagues back in the office, so they are full researchers. So you can see they've got the full permission, so they can stop, start, delete, edit the surveys. But then we've got a number of subfolders which are shared with different teams. So looking at Interviewers A, there's just one survey in there, but rather than the individual survey being shared, what I've actually done is share that folder. So again, that's shared with my two colleagues back in the office as full researchers, so they can again stop, start, delete, edit. But I've also got a couple of colleagues, Sean and Tony, and they can do any interviewing with any surveys within the Interviewers A folder. So rather than having to share individual surveys, if I want Sean and Tony to have access to the surveys that we were using earlier, I could take the shopping centre survey and I can just simply drop it into the Interviewers A folder. Likewise, I've got a folder called Interviewers B. So I've got a couple of bus routes, passenger surveys. So if we look at the shares on that one, again, I've got my main colleagues who are full researchers, but this time I've got Anya, Mary and Sarah, and they've got interviewing access to the two bus passenger surveys. And then we talked a little bit about kiosks, so you may well have a number of different kiosks in different locations. So I've got two to date, kiosk 1 and kiosk 2, and I've got two surveys in there which they've got access to. We'll end by looking at some settings. Some are survey settings which the survey designer sets, and some are app settings which the person out on the street might find useful. If we look at desktop to begin with, if I go to questionnaire properties, and if we work our way down the different sections, there's one in there for SOI, Snap Offline Interviewer. These are most likely to be used in a kiosk setup where the device is in a fixed position with members of the public interacting with it as they're passing by. You've probably seen tablets in shops and toilets asking for a quick question on satisfaction with red, amber and green smiley faces on it. But it might be that you've got a longer questionnaire, and with that there's a danger that people might walk off partway through. So here we can set the form to reset if it's been left idle for so many seconds, and with that, do you want to submit any partial data, and also an option to auto submit on the last page, so just making the form a little bit more efficient, so there's one less button to press at the end. We spoke earlier about attachments, so you can attach audio files, but you can also use the app device camera to sort of take photos and upload those. Just worth bearing in mind that each attachment will count towards your unit usage. So if someone was to attach a 5 megapixel picture, that will count as 5 additional units. So you have got the option to reduce the image size, which will of course reduce the number of units that are used per case. If I move back to the app, the interviewer also has some settings which they might amend themselves based on their own sort of personal circumstances. Go into settings. These include synchronizing options, which might be worth considering if battery life is concerned. On the Android and Apple app, there's also an additional option which lets you set a minimum battery percentage for auto syncing to occur. The app can also be set to kiosk mode, which means that once a questionnaire or form is opened, you can't get out of it unless you close the app down using the home button on the device or the power button. So assuming you keep these buttons out of reach behind a locked sort of case, the selected questionnaire will be the only form accessible on that device. There's also the option to override the survey settings with regards to timeout and other options, and you can amend the messages which are used when you press submit. So a few different options really in here, which the idea is that each individual interviewer will have their own needs and preferences to make their life as easy as possible. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a good overview of the Offline Interviewer app and how it can be used across some of your projects. I should just make it clear that although it's called the Offline Interviewer, it does very much work if you are online. It's really just for occasions when you can't be sure of a signal or the signal is somewhat unreliable. And yes, it was designed in mind for those of you who are out and about doing interviews in the proverbial field, but I'm aware of at least a couple of our clients that use it in their call centres, as due to the nature of their business and the additional security walls that their servers are hidden behind, running a standard online survey was hindering the speed in which they could interview. So offline interviewing solved that issue for them. A couple of things to remember. Any survey can be set for use with the Offline Interviewer. You just need to tick a box within Snap XMP Online. You'll need to share the survey with someone that has an interviewer account or permission, and your interviewers will only see a survey on the app when that survey is live. On screen now are a few QR codes. The one on the left will direct you to a page on our support hub, which covers the basics of running a survey to be used with the Snap Offline Interviewer app. The second one is a page where you can set up offline interview accounts. Just make sure that your interviewers create an account on the same server that you're running a project. Unless you're using your own Snap Online server, this will be either our UK or our US server. The third QR code will take you to a video which details the full setup of those looking to use participants alongside the app. We obviously did cover a little bit of that today, but this video goes into the full ins and outs of the setup. And then if you have got a spare minute, then I'd be grateful if you would complete a short survey about today's webinar. This can be accessed via the QR code on the right. Thank you for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.